Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, taking a little deep dive into this Auburn offense. Now, don't look now. I think Hugh Freeze and this offense starting to find a little bit of momentum. By far their best offensive performance against the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Want to take a dive into what's been working, kind of what were some of the problems that we saw earlier on in the season. Before we get into it, again, just want to say thank you to you guys, and definitely a special shout out to the Auburn fans. This is a program that we love talking about, really optimistic about what Hugh Freeze can do with this program. And you guys always show out with a ton of support. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, would love to hear your guys' takes. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the problems we saw earlier on in the year, and then what are starting to kind of figure it out down the stretch. Dill, going to kick this one to you. Let's start big picture here with this Auburn offense and maybe what went wrong with it early on in the season.
And I think the obvious thing is quarterback play, and that still has been very inconsistent. And again, when they brought Peyton Thorne in, you kind of knew if this team isn't really, really, really good around him, he's not going to be that guy. And I think you frankly saw some growing pains that I think people, including us, probably overrated in terms of
Yes.
how hard it is to have an offensive line that's essentially 5 new players gel quickly. And you've seen that unit struggle at times and be play inconsistent, but you've also seen it play really well. And when they play well, this offense can move. So I think you're seeing the growing pains. I think transfer portal built teams like Auburn had to be because
I
of what
think you're
Carson
seeing like the year one growing pains. And some of the problems that I have in my note sheet: one, new play caller, new transfer quarterback that came in after spring practice. Most of these wide receivers came in after spring practice as well. So not only is the scheme and the playbook getting completely overhauled, but you have a bunch of different pieces from a bunch of different places all trying to come together. It's all fun. I mean, as a fan, you're going to get excited. And I think Hugh Freeze is going to get this offense going. But to expect it to click against some of the SEC defenses we've seen Auburn go up against, like it was a little bit too optimistic. Now, what I'm most excited about is that some of these problems that you had, I mean, the vertical passing game, quarterback play, inconsistency at the wide receiver position, I think it's starting to figure itself out a little bit. And the first thing I want to talk about, there was the vertical passing game. And if you guys listen to me a lot, like one of my bigger takeaways from offenses that struggle, I think Florida is another perfect example of this, is you have an offense that really was not threatening that deeper third of a defense. And when you have an offense that's kind of like constricted to like that 10-yard range, it's really easy to have your safeties come in, squeeze down, clog up some of those passing lanes. And because Auburn just really wasn't a threat to push the ball down the field, I think it became a lot easier for defenses to kind of mess up what Auburn was trying to do on the offensive side of the ball, for lack of better terms.
And frankly, there was nothing Hugh Freeze and Montgomery could really do because you look at what their quarterbacks are doing. They're both making horrible decisions when they're asked to throw the ball down the field. They're throwing it.
We're making horrible decisions because it's the tide's turning here.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. But like you look at the first 6 or 7 games or whatever it was until that Mississippi State game, where again you did see them put the ball in the air a little bit, go over 200 yards passing, which I feel like they really had done a couple times, and it was only against really weak teams. But I think they are or they were, or maybe still are to an extent, handicapped by what they can do because this team's playing too good defensively to turn the ball over too much. And when they ask these quarterbacks to do a lot with their arms, they're not making good enough decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a definitely a portion of it, and we can kind of call it like it is. We are very familiar with Peyton Thorne as Michigan guys. Peyton Thorne is, to use a Cover 3 pod, if you all listen to the Cover 3 podcast, the Jag, just an ordinary guy. Like, he's not an all SEC quarterback. He's not an all American quarterback. It was really no secret that Hugh Freeze went to the portal just to kind of steady the ship here. I think as you get a little bit more quality quarterback play in the next couple of years, you're going to see an uptick in this offense and the capabilities and what it can do. But I don't want to just seem like it's just blaming the quarterback, because when you hear Hugh Freeze talk, the next thing I want to point out is like the wide receiver rotation. They had so many new pieces come together for this team. I don't really think they knew who their playmakers were yet. So you're going through, and a lot of these guys came in after spring practice. So you have fall camp, where some of the guys were banged up, and then you start the season out with the laundry list of different receivers, who are the guys that we can trust to run these plays and to go out and make plays. You didn't really see them have a good idea of who those guys were. I think the last couple of weeks, they're identifying their playmakers, getting them more reps with the quarterback one, and you're starting to see a little bit more chemistry built with this wide receiver rotation as well.
And that's another big thing that you kind of mentioned, just in terms of like what it feels like. You're right, the chemistry never really felt there. It's like the fact that Rivaldo Fairweather wasn't particularly involved in game plans for
Yes.
the first 5 games. It felt like really until maybe you started to see him break out a bit against Georgia, and you didn't see a ton of Jay Fair for the first couple weeks. It was a little puzzling why some of these guys.
I think that's Jay Fair's the perfect example here. Like Jay Fair, a sophomore who didn't really make that much noise as a true freshman under the old regime. The narrative and the talking points heading in, like Chain Hooks, Jair Shorter. Like you had all these transfer names. Caleb Burton you could throw in there too. Like he's playing a little bit of good ball down the stretch. That's the perfect example. You thought you had all these wide receivers who are going to be the guys who turn out to be making the plays. Jay Fair was one of those guys who I don't think Auburn was expecting to be the producer, but he is one of those producers, and now they've identified those guys. I think this offense starting to run a little bit more smooth. And the next thing, that this one is an obvious one, the run game getting going. And we said this would be imperative for Auburn. Like you look at Peyton Thorne, his best year at Michigan State was with Kenny Walker, was with a really good run game. And when you give Peyton Thorne a solid run game and can work some play action, that's when this offense is at its best. And I think against Mississippi State, where Jarquez Hunter, one of the best running backs in the SEC, goes for 17 carries, $144, averaging almost 9 yards per carry. I don't think it's a coincidence that you in turn see Peyton Thorne's best game this season as well.
And frankly, that's been the one impressive part for me of what this offensive staff has been able to do, is cobbling together a run game against legitimately good teams. I mean, you saw them run the ball okay against Ole Miss. You saw them run the ball okay against Georgia. Really, really, really tough defenses. And again, with no real threat on the outside to throw the ball deep or push it, they're still finding ways to get yards. And I like what they went to when they switched up and went to a little bit more of that read option play. You saw how much that was able to confuse Georgia. So I do think you're seeing like the seeds of why Hugh Freeze is who he is. I mean, he can figure it out a little bit on the fly, make it work. And again, he doesn't have his guys in there, especially at quarterback. When the Walker White era hits, I think that's when you start to really get excited. But to the fact that they've been able to cobble it together, given some of the struggles they've had at the most important position in probably all of sports, I think you start to get like a little impressed with what they're doing. And I know the record doesn't show it, but like,
do you think they go to the transfer portal for another quarterback this offseason?
That's an interesting thing. I think you just go one more year with Peyton Thorne. Frankly, I think at this point, who are you going to get? You could maybe try to get one more 1-year rental type guy, but I think Peyton Thorne's starting to show enough that, again, if they add a couple more linemen, if they keep just building on get a little bit better, he's not a guy who will fail you if the rest of the pieces are good around him. He's just at one point earlier in this year, he was just asked to kind of do too much because, again, their offensive line wasn't playing quite good enough. Their rushing attack wasn't quite good enough. And when the ball's in his hands every play to make it happen, that's not really his game. But I think you've seen the seeds of a guy who's good enough in the right system with the right piece.
I'm going to push back on that without knowing like how Holden Geriner's development's going in practice, not having eyeballs. Because I would, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I want like it being Peyton Thorne, Walker White, and having that responsibility be on a true freshman. And a certain discussion is like who is available in the portal. Like last year, we saw a really good crop of quarterbacks pop up in the portal. A lot of them have paid off, and some of them haven't. So depending on what quarterbacks present themselves, and we'll talk about that in a couple of months when the bullets start flying in the portal. I probably would, to be honest, because I think this offense can take it up another notch with some better quarterback play. But let's end this on a positive note. And you said it. Like Hugh Freeze is going to figure this thing out on offense and have a more consistent unit. And it's largely you're going to get some young guys who are already stepping up, but young guys who are coming into the program too. Like we mentioned a guy like Jay Fair. He's going to be a really good wide receiver. Caleb Burton, I think, is coming on. Camden Brown, Jeremiah Cobb at running back. And then you look at what they're doing on the recruiting trail. But Perry Thompson is a guy that's going to come in right away and arguably be the best wide receiver in this room. If you can flip Cam Coleman from Texas A&M, you're feeling good. The offensive weapons are going to flock to this Hugh Freeze offense. And I think when you give Hugh Freeze these weapons, that's when this offense starts cooking. And if you're an Auburn fan, yeah, this year maybe left a little bit to be desired depending on what your expectations were. It's really hard to deny that the future is going to be bright for this offense. And if you're an Auburn fan, you got to be thrilled with what you're seeing on the defensive side of the ball too.
Yeah, and that hasn't left. We talked about that coming in, that unit. Frankly, it's been good for a long time. What's been stopping Auburn is an offense, and the fact that they really, again, they go to Harsin, who's not an offensive guy, is not known for being able to put in that type of scheme at that type of level. You go get Hugh Freeze, you got to think that's going to change. You see how good of the recruiting they're able to do at those offensive skill spots, and they have their quarterback, so it wouldn't be surprised if they get a couple more studs. But yeah, that's I think what you're thinking. You saw the defense play really well. You're starting to see them figure some things out on offense as they get more comfortable with Hugh Freeze, and as he kind of again figures out what these guys can do when the pressure's on. It's one thing for practice. It's one thing. It's another thing in games. And yeah, I think you're starting to see it get better and better each week. And it started against Georgia. The one game I thought that was really sloppy offensively, and not like anything's been perfect, was that LSU game. But other than that, they've been playing pretty effectively relative to kind of what they were doing at the beginning of the
Yeah, and
season.
if
So I
you're
think you're
Auburn,
starting to
like
see the improvement.
you're excited to have a couple of games where you can really build some confidence. And I think that's kind of what this team's been missing. Like you start conference play kind of getting shellacked a little bit. You have what? You have Vanderbilt, Arkansas, New Mexico State, then you obviously go play Alabama. But those are 3 games that Auburn can win all 3 of those and kind of get this season to like a 7-5 range, which again, an improvement, but it's a building block year. Like we were talking with a lot of Auburn fans in the offseason. This isn't a roster that was going to go out and win an SEC title. I think in 3 years you're going to see a roster that's going to be competing for an SEC title. But year one, with what Brian Harsin left this program at, like you couldn't really expect it to be an SEC contending team. But seeing the young guy step up, seeing what he's doing on the recruiting trail, and Hugh Freeze, he's going to be – this will probably be one of the more active teams in the transfer portal that you see this offseason. We'll be following that. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Wanted to hop on, just give some takeaways from this Auburn offense. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.